Welcome to MedHeads, the weekly show that brings a biopsychosocial focus to issues of the day, along with special guests who will showcase their expertise and enthusiasm about their field of practice. Your host, Dr. Fergal Armstrong.
Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Fergal Armstrong and welcome to MedHeads. Today we have with us our regular guest, Craig Payne. Hello Craig, how are you?
I'm great, thanks Fergal.
Good to hear that. So I thought today we'd talk about one of your favorite subjects, understanding self, and how an understanding of self aids one in one's recovery journey. So what are your initial thoughts on that?
Yeah, one of the things you hear a lot is, I don't know myself anymore. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know why I'm doing the things I'm doing. And so to start to uncover that, you got to start to understand yourself. You got to start to understand what's brought you to this point.
So I've heard you say to people that unless you have an understanding of your own self, you get trapped in denial. And being trapped in denial, we've already discussed in previous episodes how that actually impedes recovery. So how does a lack of understanding of self trap one in denial? Talk me through that.
Well, I think if you, I think there's also this thing about you've got to challenge the belief that you've got of yourself. Mm-hmm. So by just believing that you know yourself and you know what works and you know what you need to do, that's what's keeping you in denial. You just keep on trying the same thing all the time, and it's not working.
Yeah, and this idea of self, of one's attitude about oneself, I see this a lot in my practice where I say to patients, you need to increase your socialization. Recovery is not a solitary activity. There are no lone rangers in recovery. And I say that to people to challenge them because a lot of my patients come to me and say, oh, look, I want your help, doc. I'm seeing a psychologist, but I don't want AOD counseling because I've got a psychologist. And I certainly don't want to go to a peer support group. For me, those people don't understand. Another way of thinking about it for me, they don't understand that they've lost all their roots. A tree, a healthy tree, has lots and lots of roots all over the place. And the kind of area of terrain, the area of earth for the root, it's like twice as high or twice as long as a tree is high. And that to me is a very good allegory for social connectedness and how the need for social connectedness determines our health. And a lack of social connectedness, a solitary thinking, this idea that you can do it on your own, contributes to denial and contributes to the failure in recovery. So I suppose what I'm trying to say in a roundabout way is that a patient's failure to understand themselves, a failure to understand that human beings are inherently social creatures, and a failure to appreciate the fact that their solitary concepts of recovery are going to cause them ultimately to fail recovery.
Yeah, and I think that's what will keep a lot of people away from recovery groups and peer groups and these other things, and it's that shared learning that we benefit from so much, and we need to have that story that we've told ourselves challenged.
Yes.
It's
absolutely. Yeah, and that's what I'm doing. I say to people, there are no lone rangers in recovery, so I'm challenging them to understand that they've got no roots and they need to start growing roots towards health. And that root network is basically all about their social connectedness and involving peer support groups. And for some patients, it's very difficult for them to understand this self. So a lack of self-understanding can be, I think, due to, a fear of reaching out, a past trauma, or, generally speaking, a kind of a shyness or a reservation around sharing their story. So trauma can, I think, impede self-understanding as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And breaking down those beliefs and proving to people that they are capable of so much more, and them actually proving to themselves that they're capable of so much more. And that's that value of shared experience again is so many people have had these fears. So many people have walked this path before.
Yeah.
and they've believed these things about themselves, that they can't get up in front of a group and talk, that this is what they're destined to be, that because they've done this, they deserve this life, sort of thing. And you need to have that. You need to have that challenged and start to say, no, hang on, I do deserve better, and there is better out there for me.
Yes. So I think this alludes to another aspect of understanding of self, that esteem, understanding that right now you've got no self-esteem, but actually self-esteem is so necessary, a part of recovery, and that it's it's okay to not have self-esteem at the moment, because you're sick, and you're going to get help, but actually.
Yep.
Esteem is part of is crucial to almost every step in recovery, but actually making that first connection. I think that's the hardest for patients, and if you've got no self-esteem, it's climbing uphill.
Yeah, definitely, and so how do you turn that around? I think Oscar touched on it the other week. Start to do esteemable things.
Yeah.
But yeah, and it's that thing that you can rebuild, and you're not stuck here forever.
Yeah.
And and you can start to move through, and just having that awareness within yourself to know that it's low self-esteem, and to accept that it's low self-esteem. It's one thing to sort of think these things, but once you start to accept it, again, you start to move forward with the solution.
So understanding, or rather, I would say a lack of understanding of self, traps one in denial, contributes to perpetuating the low self-esteem, which acts as a barrier to accessing treatment.
Well, because you're not going to try new things, are you? If you think, I know what works for me, and that's great, that works for you, but it's not going to work for me, and 12-step or smart recovery or all these peer groups, whatever it is that's for you, great, that works, but that doesn't work for me. Well, hang on, have you actually really given it a go? And if you walked in there open-minded enough to challenge what you think you know about yourself?
Yeah, because there is a fear, isn't there? When you're looking up at the stars, and you're lying in the gutter, and you're looking up at the stars, and amongst the stars you can see these people who are apparently successfully enjoying a life of recovery, and they're the ones that are trying to reach out to you, but you're lying in the gutter. There's a lot of negative emotion in there, isn't there? There's a lot of defensiveness.
Well, yeah, that's like the fear, the envy, the jealousy, all that sort of stuff comes up, and that's very much rooted in all the past resentments and all the current resentments that you hold. That's based on the past, So you just got to sort of look at that and work through it with other people.
And understand,
not trying to do it alone.
Don't do it alone, but understand that those negative feelings, the reasons why in you have those negative feelings, you need to understand that, appreciate them for what they are. They're just negative feelings. They're barriers to recovery. And then understand that actually you need to have a certain amount of self-knowledge to then be open to the concept of new ideas. Open to the concept that actually this is possible for you. You can do this. Yes, it's an arduous journey, but it is possible for you. There is hope. So self-understanding for me not only is about challenging the belief that, yes, your ideas of who you are need to change, your ideas of what a recovery is needs to change, but self-understanding also is about the ability to open your soul to hope and the possibility of recovery.
And you touched on that word fear before, and face the fear. And face the fact that this is going to be an uncomfortable process.
Yeah.
And you're going to have to face up to some of the actions of the past, some of the traumas of the past, and some of the great times as well. And work out what has worked for you, what hasn't, and why.
Yeah, and that's the key thing. That's the why, isn't it? And that can be
absolutely.
the why is always a very painful question to answer. I patients don't realize necessarily the link between their current substance misuse and their past history of trauma, or not necessarily even significant sexual or physical abuse, but the trauma associated with social isolation and childhood neglect, people, I think, underestimate the impact that that has on developing brains and also the risks for substance misuse. And that's got to be recognized and acknowledged. And
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, and I think also just the trauma of having gone through addiction in itself.
yes,
You know, it
yes,
it it takes you to places that you never thought you'd go. You end up doing things you never thought you'd do, acting in ways you never thought you'd act, and that's really that's what breaks the self-esteem. You know, like, and
yeah.
that can really take a long time to recover from.
So the overwhelming guilt,
The guilt and the shame.
yes. So
So, you know.
what would you say to someone who says, oh look, I don't need to go to a group. No group can help me. I've done too much in my life. There's no forgiveness. What would you say?
I share my experience of what happened,
Hmm.
and maybe ask them to speak to others who can share their experience of what changed for them when they started to go to these groups.
Yeah,
And I think that's the greatest thing we can do, because I think, and this is what's hard sometimes too, is um, it's really hard to tell someone what to do. Like,
yeah.
and not many people
Well, it's
respond
really
to it.
easy to tell someone what to do. It's really hard to actually
Ah,
affect
well,
change.
yeah, it's hard to get them to respond to it. So,
Yes.
because no, that doesn't work for me. I know what works for me, but
Yeah,
yeah, absolutely. So, so again, you can only just point out where like, start to understand, ask them questions about uh, what their real problems with doing it are, you know, like, or what their real fears around it are, and why they
yeah,
think it won't work for them, and start to
yeah,
understand those. And then
yeah,
we can start to use other people's shared experience, or show them ways where it's helped others.
yeah,
And maybe it's just planting that seed. And so they
yeah,
start to look at that and think, oh,
yeah,
well, this person got through, they got through. Maybe there's
yeah.
something to this.
And one of the things that I find very useful for me as a clinician is to constantly remind myself, look, it doesn't matter if the patient in front of me is not really, taking on board what I'm trying to tell them, or at least I don't feel they're taking on board what I'm trying to tell them. Because they're still in the chair. They're
Yeah.
still engaging with some form of relationship with a therapist. It's better that they're saying, oh, look, recovery is not for me, sat in the chair, than outside engaging in whatever substance use they've got without knowing how to access help. The fact that they're actually in the chair talking to me it needs to be celebrated. And for me, Oscar used the phrase in previous chats that we've had, he used the phrase unconditional kindness. And I learned a lot from that, actually. And I've realized the value of giving unconditional kindness to people who are at the very beginning of their journey, who are in my chair. I say that, you need to be congratulated because you're actually sat in that chair. And I think that unconditional kindness, plus the examples that of other people's stories, can gradually warm up the receptiveness of patients to actually look into themselves and understand what's wrong with them, and then try and consider a change.
Yeah, I think the biggest, one of the biggest things due to the individual nature of this process.
Yeah,
For every single person that I meet, there's different experiences, but there's a different path out. Like, there's a lot of similarities in that path,
yeah,
but what they have to confront, what they have to go through, what they have to change is different for every single person that goes in. And so I look at this as a mutual experience where, as a clinician, I'm learning,
yeah,
and they're learning, and we're taking this together. And so I'm not telling them what to do. It's a matter of trying to help them understand themselves, but also me gaining an understanding of them. And then
yeah,
together we can work through that, and we can work forwards and find out what path is going to work best for them. And just, I think in that too, it's being prepared that there's no right or wrong either necessarily. And there's going to be mistakes made, and there's going to be things that are tried that don't quite work out. And there's going to be others that you had no idea would work, and so that ability to sort of learn together and work through it is really important. And so you're both gaining understanding along the way.
Now, you've just triggered something in me that, again, I'm referring to what Oscar has described as the uniqueness of suffering, because the perception of the uniqueness of suffering has actually, or does sometimes, impede access to recovery. The idea that because my suffering is so unique, it's never happened to anyone else, there is no redemption for me, there's no hope for me. When actually everyone's suffering is different, but there is no such thing as a uniqueness of suffering. What would you say to that?
Well, I think that's where the collective, again, that shared experience. And yes, everyone's experiences have been different, but people have confronted these very similar demons along the way, and managed to work through it. And I think this is something that a thought that occurs to me all the time, and I was talking to someone about it yesterday, is people that go through this process, people that get through to recovery, that start to get some good recovery time up, not even good recovery time, but start to get through, the understanding that they have of themselves makes them so much stronger on the other side. And once they actually realize that they can live a life without a substance, and what they can get through without needing to fall back on this substance, and what they've actually overcome to get to where they are, there's so much positive in that, and they're much stronger and resilient people than probably your average Joe in the street,
So you're alluding to the concept that suffering strengthens you. That which doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so the understanding of the impediments to recovery and the understanding of oneself as you go through recovery is a crucial part of that recovery. How does self-awareness positively impact upon the recovery journey? Because we're moving from, I can't go into therapy, there's no such thing as the right therapy for me. Well, we've kind of dealt with that issue. Let's now talk about, the journey towards recovery. Can you think of a good example of how self-awareness, self-understanding helps recovery, and then maybe we can talk about how self-awareness or a lack of self-awareness can impede ongoing recovery?
Yeah, well, I think it's the awareness. The more you start to understand this about yourself, the more you understand the danger signs. You understand the triggers. You understand what you need to steer clear of. And so you start to put things into place before they've happened. Rather than waiting for it to happen.
That's so true. So self-understanding facilitates the first steps to recovery, and then allows you to identify the mines, the bombs, the petards that will undo all your good work. So triggers. So what's a trigger? What's so important about a trigger?
What's a trigger? Anything can be a trigger. And a trigger is just something that might flick off that thought or that emotion that leads you to want to use again. Anything can be a trigger. An argument, something goes well, the reward system kicks into place, and so understanding that falling back on the substance isn't going to be of any benefit to you. Understanding that it's going to take you back to where you are. And I think one of the big things is this is what keeps people stuck in that control type thinking, or one day I'll be able to control this. Is that lack of understanding that no, every time you pick up, it leads to the shit.
So, this is a really interesting point that I'd like to discuss with you. Some of my patients accuse me of not understanding them when I challenge them that there's no such thing as being in control of your substance. Some of my colleagues actually in the recovery world say to me that I don't truly understand recovery, when I challenge them and I say, there's no such thing as someone addicted to heroin who just uses on the weekend, and that's okay.
Mm.
You know,
Yeah,
I personally think that there's no such thing as someone who can control substance use. What do you say to that?
at all. At all.
At all.
No, I think, and this is what I think is tricky, is because there are people that control substance use.
Right.
There are people that there's people that can go to the pub and have 2 beers and go home. There's people that will just use party drugs on weekends and not touch it during the week, or only at 3 or 4 festivals a year.
Right.
And this is what's really difficult, and this is what I think what is strived for is, it's that thing of, well, other people can do it, so why can't I? And
right.
But this is that thing where, you know, understanding that you have a body that reacts differently to the substances.
Right.
You have a body that once something is put into it, it craves more and more and more. And it's those cravings that phenomenon of cravings that sets you apart. And so knowing that you are one of those people, that's where you start to say, all right, well, I can't use, so I need to do things to stop me.
Right. So what you're saying is, in fact, that there is a cohort of people who can control their use of party drugs or whatever drug it is.
Yeah.
But there's the cohort that we see are those that cannot control it.
Yeah.
Right.
That's exactly it. Like there are people who can go for months, like they can use for a little while, but they turn it off. It's like a light switch. They'll just flick it on and off, and they won't use for another year.
Yes.
But there's a different set.
And then the other thing is this: it's important to understand that the people who cannot control their drug use always started out thinking that they could, and thinking that they were part of a bigger cohort, perhaps, that can control their drug use.
Yeah.
And again, this goes to self-awareness, self-understanding. People who end up, who start off thinking they can control their drug use, some of them, in fact, I think the majority of them, but we can split hairs on that later. But in fact, I think all of them. But they don't have enough self-understanding, self-awareness to suddenly realize they've got a problem until they really do have the problem. Isn't that the case? Because there's a lack of self-understanding. There's a delusion of control until you hit rock bottom, when then you are utterly confronted with the enormity of what has just gone on.
Yeah, and then if that was enough, that first time of hitting rock bottom would be enough.
Yeah.
But then you hit rock bottom again, and then you hit rock bottom again.
I thought I hit rock bottom, and then the trapdoor opened. That's what you've said before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, and if but this time I'll do it differently. This time I'll only drink on weekends. This time I'll drink light beer. This time, whatever that is. But for the addict, it becomes every day. And this is the thing that, my belief is that addicts are a small percentage. There's people that can use, and it's this want to hold on to the fact that you're not part of that small percentage, and that one day you'll control it. But once you understand, once you make those mistakes, and this is, you were talking before about, just planting seeds, planting ideas, and working with people, it's allowing them to make those mistakes and learn about themselves along the way.
Yeah.
Because as I say, I can tell you, you can sort of, a lot of the time you can pick who's a heavy user and who falls into the addict category.
How do you do that? Because for me, when someone says to me, I think I can control my use disorder, I'm thinking in my head, I'll see you in a couple of months then, shall I, in my clinic?
Yeah, look, and a lot of the time that might be the case, but just by understanding a bit of their pattern, understanding a bit about how they've used in the past, the frequency, and whether they have been able to start and stop. And for the addict, that's not where things lie. The addict is constantly thinking about things. The addict is, those people that may only use every few weekends, that's all they're using is every few weekends. And an addict might try and use every few weekends, but their thoughts are consumed by using.
Yes.
in between that time.
Yes. And I think, yeah.
Yeah, the others aren't thinking about it.
What we're also alluding to is the escalation in use, which is actually one of the diagnostic criteria in DSM-5 for substance use disorder. So this is another point that I want to make, because you've said this before. Relapse doesn't start when you use again. It starts when you give yourself permission to use again. And that could be a week, 2 weeks, a month before. It starts in here. And again, people need to understand, or at least have the self-awareness, that is actually the first big harbinger of relapse.
Yeah.
Giving
once those
yourself
thoughts
permission.
start to come back in. Yeah. Once those thoughts start to come back in of using, you need to talk to someone about it. You need to start to address. You need to start to address it. You need to start to look at why those thoughts are coming back. What's happening in life that those thoughts are coming back in, that you're thinking that using might be a good idea. It doesn't mean you're going to act on it yet. But you just start to work on it. And understanding why that's happening. And maybe you've stopped going to meetings, maybe you've stopped playing sport in the mornings, maybe you're not getting up to exercise, maybe your diet's gone a little bit out. You know, all these things slowly just start to chew away and slowly start to open up the door for you to use again. And you're allowing that to happen.
The way that we can overcome this is by engaging in self-introspection and understanding of oneself. Yeah, absolutely. Got to be reflecting. You can't do that on your own. To borrow another phrase from you, Craig, there's no such thing as a lone ranger in recovery.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You've got to be reflecting on what's working for you and what's not. Yeah. But why isn't it working? Is it not working because you're not giving it 100%? Or is it not working because you're believing, you've got this old belief that you're unwilling to challenge, that something just won't work for you? Yeah.
I've also heard you speak elsewhere to describe how self-understanding is the gateway to personal responsibility. What do you mean by that?
Well, once you understand why you've made the choices you make, or why you do make the choices you make, that's when you can start to take ownership for what's happened. And once you start to take ownership, that's where you start to put the right solutions into place.
Yes. So personal responsibility, as painful and as heavy as it might be on one's soul, is really the lever of change into recovery, isn't it?
Yeah, I think I think it's easy, and what'll happen with a lot of people is you blame circumstance, blame people, blame past events, blame all these other things. But the reality is that as we go along, each step of the way, we're met with two choices. And if things get tough, you've got a choice. You can use, or you can go down the track. You can ask for the support. You can reach out for help. And each one of these steps, you've got those choices. The further into recovery you go, the stronger that choice is, the more options you have for help, the better routine and plan you have set up for yourself. So, and that can be confronting for people. But you make the choice to take the easy way or the hard way.
So self-understanding allows you to switch off the blame thrower. You know, it's not everyone's fault. It's actually your fault. You've got to take ownership of this.
It's taking ownership for, it's taking ownership for where your life sits right now. Yeah. And because there are pathways out. They're not always easy, but there are pathways out.
Yeah. Well, Craig, as usual, we've run out of time far too quickly. So give me one thought to take away.
Okay.
On the concept of self-understanding.
Don't be afraid to challenge beliefs and challenge these ideas that you have of yourself, of what works and what doesn't. Open yourself up to new ideas.
Open yourself up to new ideas. Craig Payne, thank you so much for your time and help today. I look forward to meeting with you again soon.
Cool. Cheers, Fergal. See you soon.
That's it for today's MedHeads. My name's Dr. Fergal Armstrong. We'll see you next time.